With Playtest 4 finally out for Dark and Darker, I figured there'd be a lot of players like me who last playtest I was intimidated and a little confused by spellcasting, so I stayed away from it at first, and then ended up falling in love with Cleric and playing Cleric. So don't be like me. Watch this video and I'll teach you the basics to spellcasting so you can play some of the most fun classes in Dark and Darker. So let's start with how you actually cast spells. Only the Wizard and Cleric can cast spells in Dark and Darker, and the way that you do that is by, instead of selecting an active ability, you're selecting Spell Memory 1 or Spell Memory 2. So you'll place this onto your tree, and that will activate your spell list. So I'm using Spell Memory 2, so Skill 2 section here is where I'm going to be filling up my spells. If I was using Spell Memory 1, I would just be using this side on the left. Very simple. I know it's a very intimidating screen, but it's not too bad at all. I'm a Cleric right now, which means my spell capacity is 12, and you'll see that at the bottom. There are 3 main stats that affect your spell capacity. That's your knowledge. This is an attribute, so it's like your base spell capacity increase. Then there's also going to be modifiers on gear. There's an increased percentage of spell capacity, and then there's just flat increase of spell capacity. So on me right now, I only have the percentage increase, so 5.6% spell capacity bonus. There's also items that'll just say +2 spell capacity on them, or +1 spell capacity on them. That will just flat increase your spell capacity. So let's take a look. I'm starting out with 12. That means when I go into the dungeon, I can have 12 tiers worth of spells active. And you'll see the tiers here of spells on the right side. So if I want to cast Protection, one of the greatest Cleric spells that exist, is a tier 1. It's going to use up 1 of my 12 capacity. Now what's really interesting about Dark and Darker is, once the spell is activated, my spell capacity doesn't mean I can cast Protection more times. I can only ever cast Protection 5 times when I have Protection active. No matter how much spell capacity I have, there are ways to regenerate those slots when you're in the dungeon, so you will end up casting more than 5 times, but your gear will not affect how many spells you can cast. It only affects how many different spells you can bring. And each spell, you can see a number in the bottom right corner. Each spell has a different number of casting. So Resurrection, you can only cast 1 time without finding a way to regenerate that. The 2 ways you regenerate it, one is through these campfires. Campfires will heal you, and they'll also regenerate some of your spells. And the other way is just being a wizard and having the meditation skill. So wizards can just hit Q and then regain their spells. Clerics don't have that same ability, so they're stuck with campfires, which is totally fine because clerics can heal, which is very, very strong. So we have 12 spell capacity. Let's go ahead and fill that up with some spells. I really like Heal. I like Holy Light. Sanctuary has been a blast for me to play with lately. It's the new spell in this playtest, and it's been really, really fun. But you'll notice now, suddenly, I can no longer cast Sanctuary. It's grayed out for me, and then if you look down at the spell memory priority, it's red, and then my spell cost limit here, it's 14 out of 12. So yes, it's very confusing that there are 80 different places that it shows you can't cast it, but it all comes down to your spell memory here on the left. We're at 14 out of 12, which means I need to supplement that with gear. The cool thing in Dark and Darker is I can go into the dungeon like this. I can totally go in not being able to cast Sanctuary, and if I can increase my spell memory by picking up gear in the dungeon, then I'll be able to start casting Sanctuary toward the end of the dungeon. And that's a really fun thing that you can do. So let's say I'm at 11 out of 12 and I really want to cast Divine Strike while I'm in there. Well, I'm going to need to find +1 knowledge or +1 spell capacity or some percentage of additional spell capacity on an item in order to gain that. But if I do, Divine Strike will be unlocked with all 5 casts once I'm in the dungeon. So pretty exciting. The other way, instead of trying to find those items in the dungeon, you can also just gear up. And that is where the strength lies in the Cleric and the Wizard, is that they can bring in knowledge gear ahead of time and pack really powerful spells. Please excuse my bank. We're going through a little bit of a we're going through a trying time. It's day one, so you'll have to forgive me. And I only have a couple of items here with knowledge on them left. I've been constantly dying. So padded leggings here have 1 will and 1 knowledge. If I throw those on and go back to my spells, you'll see my spell memory on the left here is 13 out of 13. My spell cost limit down at the bottom is 13 out of 13. And now Divine Strike is active, and I can bring in all 5 casts of Divine Strike. So think about how strong 1 knowledge is. Just these really simple gray pants allow me to bring, and I'm like clicking every menu, allow me to bring in an entirely additional spell and 5 full casts of it. It's just that simple from the menu. There's nothing else that I need to do now from this menu in order to cast spells once I get into the game. So let's say I throw this on and I am able to cast Divine Strike. That's awesome. The only other thing we need to think about is how we're going to cast those spells. So there are pros and cons to every different spell casting weapon, and it's really important that you understand what those are. So for Cleric, you start with a magic staff, which is cool. It has weapon damage on it, it will hit things, but the problem is it's actually slower to cast than something like a spell book. So a spell book doesn't attack, you can't whack enemies with it, but it'll actually be faster to cast with, meaning you can get your buffs out even faster. So if you're playing in a group, something like a spell book will really be useful. For Wizard, you have something like a crystal ball here, where you can hold it in one hand and then hold a dagger in your other hand perhaps, and you can stab people while you're casting with the crystal ball. And then Wizards also have crystal swords, which are pretty cool. Crystal swords do have weapon damage, and you can actually hit things with them and cast from them. So really strong, really interesting builds that you can go, and a lot of different focuses that you can use in order to cast your magic. And it's that simple. Once you're in there, you'll have your magic, and the only way to get it back is going to be through meditation if you're a wizard, and if you're a cleric, you better hope you have a campfire or use your spells as little as possible to make sure that you can escape. Use your health pots still. You definitely don't want to be using all of your spells right at the beginning. But as far as the menu goes, if you could follow along this far, then you're good to go. Go try out Wizard, go try out Cleric. I think you're going to have a blast, even if these menus can be intimidating at first. They're really fun classes to play. I hope this helped some people out there. Let me know if it did, and if you have anything else that you find confusing, because this isn't the last confusing thing you'll find in Dark and Darker, leave a comment below and let me know, and I'll gladly make a video on it to help clear things up. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys next time.